Hello and welcome. Eddie Radosovich, George Stoya. We got Josh McCuistion as well. I really tried that time. I really tried to get it right that time. Welcome in. This is the SoonerScoop.com recruiting report. It's a big week for Oklahoma. I wanted to say the no word. We're going to try to get clean on this one, George. Get me through this. Big week for Oklahoma, though. Recruiting is, I think, kind of going to be hitting the standstill point as the high school seasons begin. Oklahoma high school football season week 0 starts on Thursday night, but a big one coming up on Saturday. David Stone making his announcement, the IMG 5-star defensive tackle. We've talked about it on the Unofficial 40. We've talked about it on the SoonerScoop show. I think that Josh has come on before and talked about how big this was going to be during the breakdown of Williams-Winery and Oklahoma fans getting their heart broken. It seems like, Josh, as we welcome you in, this is kind of one of those that I think nobody wants to really truly step into the waters because of the sting that came with the Williams-Winery decision, him picking Missouri over Oklahoma over Georgia. That has been well documented. But we turn it over to you, sir. Big one coming up on Saturday. It seems like a 2-horse race here with Oklahoma and Miami. Would that be about accurate?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the way I would look at this. And you're right, Eddie. I mean, this is the must-have. This is the guy, before anybody knew that Williams-Winery was going to be important or how good of a player he was going to be evaluated as, everybody knew you had to get David Stone. And we talk about this all the time. When you come from a state like Oklahoma, where offensive linemen and defensive linemen are just not going to be plentiful enough for you to go out, for you to build your roster through your in-state talent, when they do have guys, especially difference makers like David Stone, you've got to land them. You just have to. And losing Winery, the look that Dominic McKinley's probably headed in a different direction. David Stone is the 5-star guy you've got to get. And again, even aside from all that, he is the one that they've spent 3 years recruiting this guy, whether it was this staff, the previous staff, however you want to look at that. They've made him a priority. They've done all the stuff, they've made the connections with his family, the connection with the coaching staff. There is everything there in place to finish this. Now, unlike David Hicks and like Williams-Winery, the 2 big races we've seen Oklahoma run, you just got to get it across the finish line because just like those cases, everyone's believed Oklahoma was leading for a long time, and now it's time to, get the guy committed. I realize that's not signed and there's still more work to do, but you want to clear that first hurdle.
As far as, and I don't know about putting pressure on a kid to pick Oklahoma by any means, but you talk about how big this would be. Is this the biggest recruitment for Oklahoma since when?
You'd almost have to say the only reference I could think of is like a quarterback, like a guy. And when you do that, I mean, I almost go back to Rhett Bomar, like just wow. That far back, a big time guy, because since Rhett, Oklahoma's had such a reputation. I mean, and it wasn't because of Rhett, obviously, but with the run that Sam and Jason kind of started in the mid to late 2000s, Oklahoma just hasn't had trouble recruiting elite quarterbacks. So Bomar was that first big 5-star recruit that they landed. Now, 5-star quarterbacks in Oklahoma are almost synonymous. I mean, it just kind of works together. There haven't been many situations like this where it's not just about David Stone being good. It's not just about him being an in-state guy. It's about perception. If you are going to change that perception that Oklahoma can land elite defensive talent, can bring these guys home, you've got to be able to land David Stone. I mean, like it begs the question: if not him, then who?
I don't want to.
There's. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I don't want to put too much pressure on Todd Bates, but I mean, I think just within the fan base, this is must get, can't miss territory for somebody that I think the defensive line played well. We're gonna see what happens in year number 2, but this seems like this is one of those. And you know how the social media is. I'm sure I know how the YouTube comment section is going to be, but
obviously
it's one of those. You get to say it. I don't. You get to say it. That's your one freebie of the day. It seems like just for perception, and I know that he has Jaden Jackson, a teammate of David Stone down at IMG, But it just seems from a perception standpoint, you really need to start knocking some of these down.
Yeah. Again, like I'm not one of those people that if David Stone doesn't land or doesn't end up at Oklahoma, that's Todd Bates' fault. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Like, that's not what my point is at all. I think Todd Bates, the fact that Oklahoma is in on these recruitments, it's insane, guys. Oklahoma would have been nowhere near David Hicks or Williams Nwaneri, and everybody is like, well, that's Todd Bates' fault they didn't land him. No, it's Todd Bates' fault they were there to begin with. So people have to keep some perspective on it. But at the same time, with David Stone, I mean, this is a kid that, like I said, Oklahoma has all these built-in advantages here. I mean, the kid's from the backyard. He's always had a special spot for Oklahoma. It means something to him. Now, they're fighting an uphill battle because there's some people around him that just want him out of Oklahoma. Nothing against the University of Oklahoma. That's not the problem. It's just been they feel he'd be better off in some other places. So we'll have to see how that ends. Again, you're right. After Williams Nwaneri, I'm hesitant to get too over my skis on any predictions, anything I can say. But I don't think much has changed. Like this feels a lot like Devon Mitchell, where late in the game everybody was like, "Oh, Miami's getting pretty interesting here." And I think Miami, with what we know of, their NIL and their collective and all the things they do, it's an easy target to point to. But Miami folks don't think it's going to be Miami. And so that's just very different than the Williams Nwaneri, where we know, guys like Gabe DeArmond at Power Mizzou and some of the people that, are connected at Missouri, they did think it was going to be Missouri for Williams Nwaneri. So that's a very different scenario.
You mentioned Todd Bates, Josh. I think I had a question in my mailbag this week basically saying, why isn't Todd Bates under fire basically for not landing these guys? And I sort of defended Todd Bates by saying, well, during his time in Clemson, I think it was 5 seasons there, he had 8 defensive linemen drafted that he recruited to Clemson. Oklahoma during that same span only had 6, I think maybe it was, and 4 of those 8 that Todd Bates had were first-round draft picks. So I think the guy knows what he's doing in terms of talent. But Josh, you mentioned Miami. That seems to be the team that is, I guess neck and neck with Oklahoma. Whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, Oklahoma leads, but that's the team to consider as the competition here. Do you have any concern about him throwing up the U at the game? I know we talked a little bit on the podcast about that, but if he were to pick Miami, I mean, what is it about Miami, I guess, that makes him consider them?
I think I do. I think Miami is the school that you have to be concerned with. I know there's been Michigan State talk forever, and I know David has been very earnest about how much he liked the Michigan State staff, and maybe I would have ended up wrong, but I just never believed that was going to be the choice, just because I've covered recruiting for 20 years, and I can't think of many occasions when Michigan State was chosen over Oklahoma. And then you throw in the, grew up in Oklahoma's backyard, all those things. So I just don't buy that. I know Texas A&M, there's a little bit of buzz, but I think that's, again, it's a lot like the Miami situation where there's a lot of NIL connection there. And I think people just convince themselves like, oh, well, then surely they're going to turn it around. Like we keep saying, guys, OU and the NIL is not the problem. OU is doing all they need to do with David Stone. Like, that's not the deal. There are just some out there that feel, not some out there, some around him that feel him getting away from Oklahoma and some of the people, I would say that he grew up with maybe is the way, the best path for him. Now, what I will say, and I think is something that a lot of people have probably overlooked, is that I think what Oklahoma has been able to do is make his family and some of the people that I'm talking about more comfortable with the idea of Oklahoma. Maybe they don't prefer Oklahoma. Maybe, that's more David's side of things. But I do think they feel better about if he goes to Oklahoma. Todd Bates cares about him. Brent Venables cares about him. They're going to do all they can to set him up for success while he's at Oklahoma and obviously beyond with the Soul program and all that they're doing. So I think that's what Oklahoma's kind of come to, is said, hey, okay, maybe we can't win the war of, we're going to outright convince you Oklahoma's his best choice, but maybe more of, this is a really good option, and if this is what David prefers, you can feel good about him doing that.
Well, it kind of goes back to everything that Brent Venables has talked about, being a relational program. And I think that that's something that you add into the mix. You have to kind of add it into the mix because he is so constant with the communication that has been with Oklahoma. I go back to the summer, Josh, when he was here for one of the camps, and we had that conversation that I believe we talked about on the Unofficial 40, which this week's episode is out. Josh talks about David Stone. We get into a little bit of Andy Bass, who we're going to talk about here as well, all your podcasting platforms. But I remember having that conversation. I mean, he just interacts with everybody in Norman a little bit differently. And I guess I can't say that because I haven't been to Coral Gables with him. I haven't been to East Lansing with him. But he walked around like if you came from out of town, had no idea who anybody was within the program, you would have thought that he's one of the players already. You would have thought that he's already on the team.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my first time seeing David Stone was at one of the summer camps, and he was around, and I was like, is that David? Because he just the way he carried himself was, that he was already a part of the university. I mean, he was wearing the gear, obviously, but he was also just a guy that knew everybody from the players at the camp, to the coaches, the players that are already on the team. It just feels like it's where he wants to be, it seems. And again, like you said, Eddie, we haven't seen him at some of these other visits, but he's just there all the time, and it seems, and he's just a guy that has connected so well with everybody in the program.
Josh, when you're talking about a guy that, like a David Stone, like a 5-star guy, I mean, how much does those relationships come into play when you're, obviously from the outside kind of looking in on his recruitment, maybe a big picture look at just recruiting 5-star guys. And then not to mention, I mean, I just went to one of his best friends' commitments in Michael Patterson McDonald that, he'll be kicking off his senior season on Thursday night with Westmore.
Yeah. With David, I mean, that's the stuff. Like when you look at all that goes on around this decision, Oklahoma makes all the sense in the world. Like, I mean, like you mentioned Michael. There is obviously, for those that haven't heard me tell the story 100 times, when he got his offer from Oklahoma, David Stone was on the phone with he and Todd Bates. Todd Bates made the offer to Michael Patterson McDonald. Oklahoma has done everything that it could do, that it could think to do, and is continuing to do. I mean, they know they've got to push this over the finish line. So I think with a lot of what you're getting in all these scenarios is just as David leads up to these final days. I mean, like I think the scenario of him making this decision at a game in Pennsylvania is incredibly interesting. I think you're going to want to see just kind of where, like the you thing. I mean, I know that got brought up as well. I don't think that's anything. To me, that feels like David trying to mislead you. Like that's what it feels like to me. Like a guy that doesn't like that everyone may have a good feel on what he's going to do, and everybody's told him he's going to Oklahoma for months. I've watched this happen 100 times. Where, I know he said something about like, I'm going to beat the crystal balls or whatever. Maybe he will. Maybe he shocks all of us. But so far, everybody thinks he's going to Oklahoma, and it's pretty unusual when everyone is wrong. Now, there are split decisions, that kind of thing. And not to say that this can't happen. I am always leery of nevers and always. But it's pretty rare when everybody from different markets, different areas, different sources that they're talking to, everyone thinks it's Oklahoma. And I know even talking to, I was talking to someone that was at a coaches convention, a couple of weeks ago, all the buzz around there that among schools that really didn't have any connection to this recruitment was that it was Oklahoma. So, everybody talks about this stuff. So like I said, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes and kind of how this develops. But if he picks anybody but Oklahoma, I think everyone's going to be pretty surprised. And and obviously David won't mind that.
He's a guy, too, that, I don't think it's a bad thing at all, because if I was in his position, I'd be doing the same thing. He's really enjoyed this recruiting process.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any doubt. Anybody that has followed David Stone's recruitment knows that he likes mixing it up on social media. He likes, I think just going through the process of being one of the top defensive linemen in the country.
There's no question. I mean, like Eddie, I remember a couple of years ago at one of our former employers' camps, he hung out for 45 minutes probably afterward doing interviews.
Yeah.
5-stars don't do that. Like they might, like David would come to me because he knows me well. He'd do one with me. He'd and I'm saying if he's another 5-star, I mean, generally the way that would go is they'd know me, they'd talk to me for a few minutes, and then they'd sneak out the back gate. Like they'd get out there as quick as they can because they're going to have to sit there for 45 minutes and do interviews. That's not David. David likes all this stuff. He's very engaged with it. He knows that, I think there was an Instagram not long ago where he was making fun of Caden Durham and I think Michael because their Insta Live was only getting like 400 viewers. He's like, mine get over 1,000, like he's aware of that stuff. He pays attention to it. So I think that's going to be something kind of that you have to keep in mind, that David knows what he's doing. The you thing, David's going to spend months and months telling you he's going to surprise you and he's going to throw you off the scent. But a week before his decision, he's going to give it away on a national like on a feed that everybody in the world can see. That's not going to happen. That's not what he was doing there. He's trying to build some suspense either way. And so anybody taking that as some true indication of what his thinking is, I don't understand.
Eddie, you mentioned how much he loves the recruitment. Josh, I'm going to ask you, when he commits on Saturday, wherever he commits, is this a recruitment that's, set in stone, pun intended, or is it something that is
he's going to steal that. Josh is going to steal that for a headline if he ends up committing to Oklahoma, maybe.
But I would assume with a 5-star, it's always you got to continue to recruit him the rest of the way, all the way to signing day. I would assume.
Of course. I mean, OU is smart enough to know that any elite guy they land, you're just going to keep recruiting. I mean, like, hey, we got the commitment. That means I think most smart staffs realize a commitment just means you led the day a decision was made. Because there's stuff that's going to happen. Stuff can change. You never know what the variables may be. And Miami, Texas A&M, we know those schools aren't going anywhere. They're going to keep recruiting him. Jimbo Fisher or Mario Cristobal are not going to bat an eye about continuing to recruit a guy committed elsewhere. I mean, Brent Venables is one of the, I would say, one of the more morally upstanding coaches I know of, and Brent Venables recruits committed guys. Jimbo Fisher and Mario Cristobal aren't even going to think about it. So
the idea of Dan Lanning or Jimbo Fisher, like, just, all right, we respect your decision. We're not going to continue to recruit. Or the other side of it with Oklahoma fans thinking that they would just stop recruiting Williams-Nwaneri.
Yeah.
100%. Like, I would be shocked if guys like that have ever said, I respect your decision, because basically the moment they have to respect your decision, you signed a letter of intent and they no longer care and aren't talking to you anyway. So I don't think that's going to be a thing. But at the same time, to the heart of what George is asking about, I think David would like to be done with this. I know there's been several different points in the process. He thought about deciding, thought about committing, and then kind of pulled back from it for one reason or another. So I think it's hard for, like, if he picks, let's say he picks Oklahoma, it's tough for me to imagine him not signing with Oklahoma unless something very, very dramatic changed. Like, we saw with, I mentioned Michigan State earlier. They lost the D-line specialist, Brandon Jordan, that he knew so well. They lost Marco Coleman. Like, there was a lot there that changed. If that all were to come to pass, like, Todd Bates became a head coach somewhere or, whatever it may be, then maybe something could give there. But to me, that's pretty far-fetched and something that's the kind of stuff that I think it would take for this to really kind of come back into play again.
You compared this to a little bit of a scenario where Oklahoma's chasing a 5-star quarterback, and that's a big deal. We've always talked about the quarterback in any class. It doesn't really matter, 25, 26, so on and so on. They've always kind of been the magnet of that class. They've been the leader of that class. For Oklahoma in the 2024 class, they have Michael Hawkins already in the boat, but at the same time, what kind of impact would that have just in terms of it seems like David would be a type of guy that would be very comfortable recruiting for the school. What kind of impact do you think that would have in terms of building to the defensive line class? Him going to get somebody in a Nigel Smith or a Dominic McKinley. What kind of impact do you think that would be? And I said 24. I'm just an idiot. I mean, you guys have watched this show, so you kind of get it.
I think it's huge. I mean, because again, it is we talk about perception. Well, that goes both ways. So if the perception, they lose him and that's wrong, that's a hill you've got to fight. But if you land him, hey, it's okay for an elite defensive lineman to go there because that's the deal. There's always got to be that first guy through the wall. That's kind of like what I was talking about with Rhett Bomar. Like Oklahoma had Jason White, they'd had Nate Hibble, and they'd had all these guys, but they'd never landed that elite big-time quarterback. And then Rhett was a top 10 guy, picks Oklahoma. And even though it wasn't him that kind of changed the story of, or, I guess furthered the story of being a quarterback at Oklahoma, it was, he was kind of one of the guys that made Oklahoma cool for a quarterback to go to. And David Stone allows that ability too, which only gets magnified by the fact that he plays at one of the premier programs in the country, highly visible, going to be playing all kinds of games. He plays at Thompson in Alabama next week. Just a loaded roster there. Late in the season, he's going to play. I was all geared up, and now I'm blanking on who it is. But I mean, there are a ton of big games on the schedule. They're going to be on ESPN some of the time. They're going to be available for people to see. So I think that's big. Then you add in Dominic McKinley, Nigel Smith, guys who know David. But I think one of the interesting ones is Danny Okoye, another in-state guy, going to see that, David could have went anywhere, and he chose Oklahoma, which is what Oklahoma's trying to get me to do. I have a huge list of choices as well, and I can go to Oklahoma, be on the same line with him, PJ Adebawore. Again, you just start to build some momentum, and then you look into that 25 class, and then, okay, you're going there too, where, again, IMG's going to have more guys, and you've taken two of that defensive line. And I think that's where you start to build, really start to make it possible to build one defensive line class after another. Because like we talk about, guys, Alabama and Georgia aren't talking about landing one or two big-time guys. They want 4 or 5 big-time guys every single year, and that's how you compete at that level.
See, the first intuition is always correct. And I don't know why I threw the 2025 stuff out there. I think I confused myself.
Yeah, you definitely did.
But neither you some bitches ever said anything. So
I just wanted you to look stupid. But
interesting. It's interesting, George. That's all I'm going to say. Your arms look small today. As for David Stone, though, that's about it. I mean, there's only so much you can talk about. He has everything I think has been out there. I know Chad Simmons has caught up with him late last week. It just OU Miami. That seems to be kind of the race. So that would be the second stone to go if Oklahoma could get his commitment on Saturday. That's coming up at halftime, Josh. Is that correct? Halftime, then the game starts at 7 o'clock?
I believe so. That's my understanding. And I believe it starts at 7 Eastern. So just kind of playing accordingly there because he's in Pennsylvania. And so
I think
I believe that's correct, but it'll be on ESPN Plus for those that want to sit and watch it. Little plug for someone that gives us nothing. So, whatever.
Sure. Well, I worked for ESPN for like a summer. So that was technically kind of true. Actually, I just kept the scorebook at a Women's College World Series game, so I didn't really work for him at all. I've been on College Game Day, though. Look it up. Andy Bass. That's the announcement coming up on Thursday. Syracuse, Kansas State, and Oklahoma made his top 3. The Heritage Hall, kind of doing everything. I saw him over at camp. I saw him in a scrimmage over at Carl Albert. You'll see some of those highlights coming up. Our first kind of impression, though, was at Oklahoma camp, and that's where he ended up earning an offer, catching the attention of all the coaches. He put on a show that day, Josh. I know that was one of the guys that we highlighted in a breakdown that we did immediately following the camp, the day that he ended up getting the offer from Oklahoma. 2A state champion for Heritage Hall a season ago. He's extremely, extremely fast. I mean, you look at his track numbers, 10.56, 100, 21.74, 200. He was on the 4x4, 400 relay team, or 4x100 relay team. I think they ran like a state record, 41.96. What can you say about this guy? I mean, he's such an interesting player. I know that you've wrote about him in Scoop. You wrote about him on in Oklahoma, just in terms of what they could see him fitting in at Oklahoma, and it sounds like running back would be the case. I know he's been offered by Syracuse as a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that, I mean, you look at him, and Kansas State's not doing it quite as much as they used to, but this is the kind of guy that goes to Kansas State. You forget about him for a couple of years, and all of a sudden he's a nightmare. That Colin Klein, that tough runner that can throw the ball, and he has some of that in his game. So, I mean, you can understand why places like Syracuse and Kansas State are interested in him. And I think at the end of the day, the nice thing about Andy Bass for all three of the schools, he is a guy that, if you had an idea, you had a preset decision on where you were going to start him, if that doesn't work, you can try him a lot of different places. He's a very kind of versatile and unique athlete. I mean, if it doesn't work at running back, you could move him to slot receiver. Doesn't work there. Okay, let's try him on the defensive side of the ball. There's a lot of chances to find the right spot for Andy Bass. So I think that's one of the really appealing parts of his game. But like you mentioned, his speed, we talked about it a little bit on the pod with Bob. There is such a easy way for him to win a rep. I talk all the time about how is a receiver going to beat someone consistently. Most guys can't run like Andy Bass, and most guys aren't 200 pounds and run like Andy Bass does. So I think that is a really interesting possibility. Like I said, if they wanted to move him to slot receiver, I think he's a guy that'll get a little bit of cross training. I think he'll do a little bit of both, and they'll kind of, do some different things. I was joking with George before we started the podcast. He is a Philly special dream. Like that. That's exactly what it looks like, because if it's not there, he's absolutely dangerous to tuck it and run the ball. But he's got the ability to throw and does it on the move all the time for Heritage Hall. So there's a lot that Jeff Lebby can do with him. And I think that's going to be interesting to see if Oklahoma can, like I said, close that deal and land him on Thursday. There's really no limit to what they can do. And like I said, even if it doesn't work, you move him around. You keep finding, just keep turning the Rubik's Cube and find the right answer eventually.
Definitely excited to see him run a trick play. I think that's going to happen. If he commits to Oklahoma, obviously that's tomorrow morning. But Josh, I wanted to ask you about, when Venables came in, they said, hey, we want to recruit the state of Oklahoma. Is Andy Bass even considered under the previous regime, or is this a situation that it's a perfect example of bringing somebody in that is super talented in the state and can do some different things for you?
I've been thinking of writing a story about all the guys that are currently on Oklahoma's roster that would not be there if this was 2 years ago. And Andy Bass is absolutely one of those guys. Let's be real. There was a time when it didn't look like he was going to be anyway. And then he just kept impressing people, kept going to camps. I know not long before he went to Oklahoma, he went to a camp in Dallas. And that's when he came in at like 5'10" and a quarter, like 197. I think ran a 4.43 at one of the college camps. It was, I believe, electric timed from what I was told, one of the guys that was working it. And, you eventually have to pay attention to that. But again, George, you were watching it from afar for a few years, but you were there, and Eddie and I have seen it. They've overlooked a lot, or they did overlook a lot of in-state guys that I thought were at least worthy of a longer look. But I think it's also a sign of what Brent Venables has done with those football camps. Andy Bass wouldn't have been invited. He wouldn't have come and worked out. It would have been just a few handful of guys to watch over 6 days. But Brent Venables has put a focus on it, and that's why we've seen so many offers, so many commitments roll out of performances at the 6 days of camp in early June. And it's why you have those events, because you get to have a look at these guys. And Oklahoma, we can go back and forth about whether, Bass is going to be a preferred walk-on, whether he's going to be a scholarship guy, how they're going to handle that. But the bottom line is they want that guy, and they know he can help them. And it matters to Andy Bass to be an in-state guy playing at Oklahoma.
Play alongside Gavin Freeman. He went to high school at Heritage Hall. Rivers Faulkner, who won a state championship with him last year, is a walk-on on the team right now, I believe, playing linebacker. I would say, too, 5'10", 197, I think is what we have him listed at on 3. I think he could carry 10, 15 more pounds. I mean, he is a very, very well put-together kid. I fear for what some of the 3A defenses are going to have to do to try to contain him this year.
Well, you guys, does Oklahoma, do they mandatorily have to move him to receiver after Sterling Shepard and Gavin Freeman? Heritage Hall, you just put him at receiver. I don't care if he's 6'5", 305. Like, move him to receiver and let him play.
I think that might be the problem right now.
We know we're not going to question our guys over there at Hall, but I just mean at Oklahoma, the track record from Hall to Oklahoma has been pretty successful at receiver.
Yeah, they've been exceptional, and he comes from a really good program. They've won a couple gold balls and looking for I think it would be back-to-back. I don't think that they won in 21, but his decision comes down Thursday morning. I'll be over there at Heritage Hall High School. It's kind of an exciting just if he ends up going to Oklahoma. I can't put enough emphasis on. That was a really tough word to say. I'm going to be honest. It really can't be put into words, though. I mean, when Brent Venables said that he wanted to come in and lock down the state, it's been chronicled as far as what they're doing in 24, what they're doing in 25 already with Kevin Sperry. That was where we ended up seeing him over seeing Carl Albert as they begin their another state championship run for the Titans over in East Oklahoma City. But it's a big deal, and third on the list is a guy that you wrote about, I believe, in Monday Notes on the Crimson Corner, which is a great time to join SoonerScoop.com. 25% off annual membership, promo code Sooner25. Sooner25 is the promo code for a 25% off to an annual membership on SoonerScoop.com. And it was something that you wrote about in talking about Grant Bricks, a massive, massive human offensive lineman out of Iowa.
Yeah, this is it's so funny, to acknowledge that there's guys like this out of the middle of nowhere. I mean, guys, it's hard to put in perspective how small the school is he comes from. This is a small school kid by every definition of the word. And a month ago, I kind of thought Oklahoma was on the outside looking in, but they've just kept working at it, kept fighting. And I really think the thing that has sold him the most on Oklahoma is obviously Bill Bedenbaugh. We all get that. I mean, that makes all the sense in the world. Of the 3 coaches, the 3 staffs working on him, he's clearly the one that has the most track record of NFL production. For those that don't know, Grant's pretty much down to Kansas State, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. Now, Kansas State and Nebraska, both very good staffs. Kansas State probably got the best line in the Big 12 this year. So, I understand the appeal there. And but with Oklahoma, it's not just Bedenbaugh. It's also Jerry Schmidt, who I think, from what I can gather, Bedenbaugh's done a very good job of saying, hey, man, all that success that we were really having in the late 2010s, Jerry had a big hand in that. And then he left, things changed a little bit. Now, I'm not saying he's blaming the former staff or anything like that. Just kind of I know Coach Schmidt and I know it works when we work together. And I think Bricks has bought into that to a large degree. And I think it's that basically marked against Nebraska's really, really close to home. This is a small town kid that being close to home matters to. And it's just kind of weighing those two things out for him.
There were 3 names, and you're talking about Jerry Schmidt, and it's something about the trenches. It's probably pretty obvious why he pays so much attention to the defensive line, but especially the offensive line. That is something that Savion Byrd brought up at post-practice interviews over the course of the week in terms of kind of his development, how much Jerry Schmidt had meant to him, getting him on the right eating plan or nutrition program. I don't know about the pancakes. I don't know if that's part of the nutrition plan, but getting over 300 pounds. But he specifically named him and said how much of a big relationship he has with Jerry Schmidt. And I think that's notable. It seems like it took that first year to really kind of get everything on the same playing field. And I'm talking about this current team, but it seems like those words are being passed down, if you will, from the current players and the coaching staff to just kind of the focus, like you said, Josh, of how important he is to the program.
It's got to be, right? Like, I mean, if I'm Bill Biedenbaugh and I have a creature like Tyler Guyton walking around, look at him. He's 330 pounds. Look how he carries that. Like, that's not an accident. Now, part of that is incredible genetics, but at the same time, Jerry Schmidt has a big hand in that. I mean, we've watched that frame change over the last year and a half, and it's not accidental. I mean, there's just no denying that. So I think I think that's been a big part of it. Like I said, Bricks is really hard to read. He doesn't talk much. When he does, he doesn't say. He's very careful with the way he says things and what he says. But I just talking to people, both in Lincoln, a little bit in Manhattan, and obviously in Norman. I think this is an OU Nebraska thing. I just think it's going to come down to really it's a head versus heart. Like, what does he want to do? If he wants to stay closer to his home, which we all know is a priority to him, then it's going to be pretty tough to win that race. Oklahoma's the farthest of the three without question. But at the same time, I think he has started to see what's possible. He went to Alabama. He went to Oklahoma. He's a smart enough kid. He can see the difference in where those programs are right now. And so I think maybe he's starting to see, okay, maybe I've got to go a little out of my comfort zone to become the player that I have the ability to be. I mean, because this is the number 2 interior offensive line in the country, according to On3. This isn't just some kid from Iowa that's a project. Like, and he's got work to do. I don't mean to put it that way, but his talent is very high end, and is a guy that could be I hate to keep using that term, but a foundational piece for this team as they go into the SEC.
Josh, you mentioned Bill Biedenbaugh earlier. There's been some questions about, what does this offensive line class look like in 2024? Just how, and Bill's recruited well in the past. We all know that, but just how big of a win would it be for Bill to get that type of a player, especially in this class where they have had some misses on the offensive line?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, there's just no question. They need this kind of guy to go with what was last year was a smaller class, but a really good one. I mean, you had Josh Bates, who's an Army or not Army, but a U.S. All-American Bowl All-American, whatever you want to call it.
He plays us in San Antonio in December.
Yeah.
Yes. Like,
or January.
That's one of those things like that. I'll never be able to fix that in my brain. That's the Army All-American game. That's all I can ever call it. But, then you've got Caden Green, who's an Under Armour All-American. Logan Howland, who I think has tremendous upside. And the guy that was kind of the afterthought in the group is Heath Ozida, who's clearly impressed the hell out of everybody. So I think you have to like what they're doing. But, you throw in with this class, you've got B.J. Brooks already. You've got Josh Iasosa, 2 clear interior guys, in my opinion. They can be guards. I think Bricks is kind of flexible in that way. I think he is, like I said, he's listed as an interior offensive lineman on 3 right now, but we all know Bill kind of likes that mauler at tackle. Like, he'll usually have the athletic guy, and they seem to be at right tackle a lot. It just works out that way sometimes. But I think he could play tackle in the way they use their offensive line. But Brooks and Iasosa, you've got inside. Then, you try and land the Daniel Akinkumi kid, who is going to visit in early September. I think he could make a decision while he's on campus. That, for those that don't know, this is a kid plays at London. He's like a part of the NFL Academy over there. Really interesting story. But I think he has a world of potential. Just truly interesting player that a guy like Bill, if Bill can get him to buy into the work, kind of like Savion Byrd was talking about this week, get him to buy into the day-to-day consistency and the things you're going to have to do to be great, the talent is there for him to be a special player. So You get Bricks, it kind of gives you that recruiting credibility. You know, you can say, okay, we got this big time guy, makes up for some of the misses that he had that clearly this class didn't go to plan. But I think you have a chance to salvage it with some guys that have real potential, but also have clear roles and how they can kind of fit into that offensive line room going forward.
And I should say that, Andy Bass's decision's coming up on Thursday. David Stone's on Saturday. There is no set date for Bricks to make any type of announcement, right? It's just, it could be happening while we're taping this right now. It's kind of one of those deals as opposed to there's something actually set up.
Guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I am constantly checking my phone and Twitter right now because it's not even that Grant Bricks will just make a decision with no big ceremony. There is a very real possibility Grant Bricks doesn't make any announcement. He'll just commit, and then somebody's sources will confirm to me or Sean Callahan at a Nebraska site or someone like that, hey, he made a decision and it's X. Like that is how low key this guy is.
Sounds like Beanball type of guy.
And talking to a couple people today, like they're like, that's absolutely on the table. That could happen. So we will see how he goes about announcing it. But no, there's no set timeline. What I will say is I was told, I think about this time last week, that the expectation was that it would be by this Friday, because he has said he doesn't want to go into his senior season not having a decision. Now he still has one more week, but my expectation was it was going to be over by this weekend. So if it's now, if it's an hour from now, if it's 2 days from now, that shouldn't surprise anyone.
What an important week. I mean, you're talking about, I think especially when you're talking about making the move to the SEC, you have a defensive lineman, one of the top ones in the country. You have an offensive lineman, one of the top ones in the country, which I think anybody that knows anything about, that brand of football, you got to be good up front. And then, keeping a kid in state in Andy Bass. It's certainly an interesting kind of week here as everything kind of comes to a head on Saturday night with David Stone's announcement. Josh, we appreciate it. Thank you for joining us, and thank you out there for joining us today on the SoonerScoop.com recruiting report. Remember, 25% off annual membership, promo code Sooner25, as well as any of the merchandise behind us. Make Lindsay Street great again. All that merch is 20% off as well. Promo code We Did It, SoonerScoopStore.com. So for Josh, George, I'm Eddie. We'll talk to you next time